Hey Jacob, your dad was telling me that you really like that hot sauce, and we looked at some photos, and I was able to establish that he went home with 2023 uh, vintage hot sauce that was the pineapple mango Carolina Reaper ghost pepper recipe. Um, so it was actually started the brine at the end of the growing season, just before the first hard freeze, which was mid-October this year, really early. I went out and harvested everything and started the brine, and then processed the brine in February 2023. So about 4 months, 3.5, 4 months on that brine. And so your dad said you really liked it, and be honest with you, a lot of people find it too hot because, again, it was the primary peppers I had this year were Carolina Reapers and ghost peppers, and then I had to augment that batch with I think I bought some bell peppers and a whole bunch of store-bought jalapenos, green jalapenos. Not my usual mix, so more heat than flavor this year. But the pineapple mango obviously gives it a little bit of extra body and sweetness. So anyway, I'm going to give you that recipe. I did want to give you a little history. We had the two big droughts last year, 45 days, 50 days, plus on two different droughts, with just a week or two in between them, actually. So we had a really rainy spring, and then first big long drought, and then a little bit of rain, a week or two of rain, and then another big long drought. And significant only because there's a lot of pressure on the wildlife and the deer. Everything in the forest dried up. The only green thing in all of Flint Ridge were the gardens, and mine was the only garden in this area. So I had a lot of incursion by deer that I hadn't had to deal with in the past. So normally I would go out and buy Mexibels and cayennes and Tabascos and jalapenos and some sweet peppers, some habanero. I like to have a variety of peppers, hot and sweet. And so I think there's generally more flavor in my hot sauces, and maybe they're not quite as hot. But because of the deer pressure, ultimately I had to put up an electric fence. And last year I had decided I'm not going to buy any peppers this year beyond what I have to, because I had so many volunteers. I've got raised bed garden, and I do my own composting. So I had hundreds of pepper plants and tomato plants come up and volunteer, and I just can't justify spending the money if I'm going to get free resources. So that's the direction I went last year. I had to buy Carolina Reapers, and then someone gave me a couple of ghost peppers because I didn't have those in the mix, and I wanted to make sure I did have some heat-producing peppers. So as it turns out, almost all of my volunteers were the Tabasco peppers, which are small, really about this big, thin walled. And I did grow some New Mexico Hatch green chili. I was able to get a few of those past the deer pressure and harvest a few green, and even a few red New Mexico style green and red chilies, and some cayennes, a few cayennes, but mainly Tabasco, a few jalapenos. But anyway, as I say, I had to augment by buying bell peppers, and it was probably 10 pounds of jalapenos that went into that batch. So the recipe for the batch, it was a pineapple mango. So start off with a small pineapple and cut off the rinds and process it the way you would. There's plenty of YouTubes on this. Process it the way you would if you're going to make pineapple jam or something like that. So you're going to discard the fibrous center part and of course the skin, and then cut the rest into strips and chunks. And I put the pineapple and the mango in the bottom of the processing jar. And this was a gallon jar, glass jar, and they're standard size. We buy kimchi from the Asian market, and so that's where we use. The place we buy it from uses glass jars, and so we recycle those. But you can buy them at Walmart or wherever, anywhere canning supplies. So 1 gallon glass jar. Cut up the pineapple into chunks. Drop that into the bottom. Cut up your mango. I did 2 mangoes. And again, you're cutting off the skin, and then you're going to cut the soft, edible parts away from the fibrous core. And drop those mango bits down in there. And then on my peppers, there's different ways to do that. I have a Vitamix, which is important because how you process your peppers is sort of dependent on for the brine is sort of dependent on how you're going to process it at the end. Well, with the Vitamix, it pulverizes everything. Extremely high-speed blender, and it will pulverize those seeds. So, I guess I don't know. I haven't looked that closely. Maybe you can see little pieces of seed, but I don't think so. I think it just completely liquefies everything at the end. So, and the heat is in the heat in the pepper. The majority of the heat's in the white bit. So when you cut a pepper open, like a jalapeno, a fat walled pepper, and scrape out the seeds, you're scraping out some of that white stuff goes with the seeds, and that's where your good part of your heat is. So I used a few bell peppers, red bell peppers for color, and I did take those seeds out, and I processed some of the seeds from the jalapenos, the thicker walled peppers. But when it comes to the cayennes and the Tabascos, the little thin walled guys, and I mean Tabasco's literally just that big. I'm not going to cut those little things open and take the seeds out, so I just dump those in there into a food processor. So nothing goes into the big jar until you've processed it in a food processor. And that's just like dicing it up, like if you're going to make a salsa. You don't want to make it liquefied. You don't want it running, watery. You just want to kind of julienne it. Salsa style consistency is what you want. So take those peppers with the big thick hulled peppers. I'll go ahead and take those seeds out. But for the finer peppers, thin walled, the reapers and the ghost peppers, I just drop them in there and hit the little spin button and spin them up just until they're nice sized, salsa size chunks, and then put those into your gallon jar. And it takes a lot of peppers to fill up a gallon jar once you slice them up like that, dicing them. So as I say, I went out and harvested the end of year harvest. Not as many peppers as I would have had, but still it was a fair amount of homegrown peppers. All the heat came from the homegrown. Then I went and got the mild jalapenos and some bell peppers a few bell peppers, maybe half a dozen bell peppers for color. And some of the New Mexico chilies had turned red. Some of the cayennes and the Tabasco had as well. So yours was kind of a reddish color. So anyway, then put everything, and you want to press it down into that jar. You don't want air pockets. That's the last thing you want. So you're adding stuff in, and you're tamping it down. And you can use a tamper, or if your hand is small enough to get into that gallon jar, you can stick your hand down in there and mash the peppers down. As always, anytime you're dealing with really hot peppers, you know the precautions to take. You definitely got to wash your hands very well. My hands would just catch fire, and I would wash them very well after. So I didn't transfer it to my eyes or sinus anywhere, but my hands would burn like liquid fire. So I really recommend just wear the food handler gloves. No contact with your skin at all when you're doing this. But get everything tight into that jar. Pack it down in there tight until you just absolutely can't add any more peppers, and then you're going to have one of these rigs, and I'll send your dad the link to where to get these. First, you get the lid with this hole in it and the little rubber gasket, and then you've got to have a airlock. There are different kinds of airlocks. This is the one I used. This is what I prefer. There are other styles, some that look kind of like if you look underneath your sink and look at that S-shaped drain, there's some that look a little bit like that too. But I like this, and there's supposed to be a lid on top. I've got it back there in my supplies, little plastic lid so no dust falls down in there. And this is an inner tube here that goes down that lets air out. But you fill the outer chamber with your brine solution, put a lid on there, and then air bubbles can come out, but no bacteria can go in there. No contaminated air can get in there. So I really like this setup. So the brining is what I think gives my peppers the flavor that people like. It's how they do Tabasco. They age that maybe for a year or two in oak barrels, big scale operation, climate controlled, and etc. And we do keep our house in the winter. Our thermostat's set on 64, so that's something to think about. Definitely a cool environment, and then I keep it on the counter over here with no direct sunlight on it. So no direct sunlight, 64 degrees. There may have been some days where it was warmer when we had warm winter days, but for the most part, the thermostat was set on 64, and that's what we had. If you had your thermostat set higher, I don't know that you could stretch brine to 3 months or 4 months. It would definitely require some monitoring, and of course you're going to want to read up on how to brine peppers, look at some YouTube channels for things to look out for. But basically, if you see anything green, funky, furry looking, your brine is ruined and you need to dump it out and start over. Otherwise, there is something called CALM, which is not a bad fungus, and it's kind of a milky white, and that's acceptable. I don't like to see a lot of it, and I didn't see a lot of it with this batch. I have had batches where it's gotten pretty thick, and I just find it distasteful, and I we'll rinse the brine and start over to get rid of it, or if it's really really bad, then I just throw it out, throw the whole batch out, and call it a wash. But anyway, the brine is, I keep talking about brine, it's a 3% salt solution. And the formula I use is 3 tablespoons of kosher salt. You can't use table salt. Kosher salt, $2-3 for a couple pounds of kosher salt. Not expensive at all. You could use sea salt, I suppose. I just stick with kosher salt myself because it's readily available. It's inexpensive. You could use like the pink Himalayan salt, but it's different. It would be a different amount because it's a much finer salt. I don't know the recipe for that, so I just recommend use what I use, kosher salt, or do your own research and find a different brine recipe. But you take a quart of water, add 3 tablespoons, and when I say quart of water, I should say well water is fine, but if you're on city water, don't use that. Instead, buy a gallon of distilled water or spring water, some kind of filtered water. A quart of that, 3 tablespoons of the kosher salt, shake that up real good, stir it, whatever your method is, until it's clear. In other words, the salt is fully dissolved, cannot be seen at all, clear liquid. Then you pour that into your gallon over the top of your, do this until you've already packed it tight and really mashed it down in there and gotten all the air bubbles out you can, as far as any air pockets, I should say. Then you pour your water in there. It's going to take several quarts, 2.5 quarts or so, probably, of this brine solution to fill that jar up. And what I do, you don't want to have any vegetable matter exposed to air within this system. You want it to be a completely airless system as far as the peppers are concerned. So in that gallon jar, that lid circumference is just enough to accept a quart, a largemouth quart lid. So I turn that lid upside down, and I'll mash that down in there, and that's how I'll do the last bit of compaction for the top of that jar. And then I'll pour my water on and leave that lid in there upside down and pour my water in on top. And then the lid will fill up with water. The upside down lid will fill up. Then the water will start seeping out into the jar. So anyway, when the jar is completely full, what's sitting on top is that upside down lid full of water. And then the penetration part of this airlock system is sitting in that lid of water, that upside down lid. Okay, so then you screw this down, finger tight, just fairly tight. That creates your airlock. You put a little bit of your 3% brine solution into the outer chamber here on this guy, and then put your lid on there, and you've got an airlock. You've got an airtight system where air can come out, but you're not going to get dust and bacteria and dirty air coming in there. So what happens nothing happens for a day or two, but as the lactofermentation begins to take place, and that's what this is all based on, lactofermentation, good bacteria. So it's bacterial ferment, but it's all good bacteria. It's the stuff you want in your gut. Sauerkraut's made this way. Chow chow, a lot of this is how people used to preserve their garden stuff before there was refrigeration. So as this fermentation begins to take place, it does off gas, and that's where you'll have air bubbles coming up, and you'll want to set your gallon jar onto a plate, something that will contain the leakage, because you will have fluid bubbling up out of this, even though it's airtight, more or less airtight. You're going to have fluid the gas is going to come out, force the fluid out. And as that fluid comes out, you've got to top off with more brine. So you've got to keep a quart. Like I said, it'll take about 2.5 quarts to fill this gallon. You keep that half quart of pre-mixed 3% brine solution on hand, and then you top this off. And it's going to be active for the first month or so, maybe 5 or 6 weeks. And then it will be pretty stable after that. But for 5 or 6 weeks, you need to keep a 3% brine. So you'll go through your half quart that you had left, and then you'll have to mix another quart, probably go through that and part of another quart just for topping off as you go through the process. And then at a certain point, when there's not much active fermentation taking place, you can take this lid off and put a common lid on and put it in the refrigerator if you wanted to use those brined peppers for recipes or something. But of course, you're going to want to make hot sauce with it. So I let mine go for a good month and a half after the active fermentation had ended, just because I wanted to, they say that the longer it ages, the more flavorful it is. So I tend to keep my brines going as long as possible. I started seeing a little bit of that calm around the top on this, and so I decided, I would have let it brine a little bit longer, but I decided I didn't want to fight with the calm, and so I just decided to go ahead and process it. So for processing, I use the Vitamix, and you're going to want to do this in a well-ventilated area. Have your vent hood going. Have some windows open, maybe, fan blowing air outside. It's going to heat up your house as far as like it's going to get up your nose and etc. It's very, very fragrant, and some people can enjoy that even, and some people can tolerate it, some people don't like it at all, some people can't tolerate it. So just be prepared. It can be eye-watering, depending. But for processing, I take it out and I use a ladle. I start ladling pepper, and you're going to get fluid along with the pepper. And have a big bowl and a strainer in that bowl, and strain. Let the juice go into the bowl. Keep the peppers in the strainer. Dump those into your blender. I really recommend the Vitamix. I have never made it with a standard blender, and I don't know, that would be the same result. But put it in the Vitamix, and then add a little bit of the strained water into the Vitamix, half a cup or whatever, and start processing, and then add some vinegar, and just keep adding vinegar and alternating vinegar, and probably 2 parts vinegar, 1 part of that vinegar water, of the fermented water that you've strained out, until you get to the consistency that you want. And I like mine a little thicker, but you can definitely just add more vinegar and fermented water until you get it thinner than that. But I like mine a little thicker. And then do a little taste test. I typically want to add some salt. And by the way, backing all the way back up in that recipe, I did add 5 or 6 cloves of garlic to the initial. So the order would be pineapple, then mango, then garlic. And I sliced up some carrots and put some, maybe 1 or 2 medium-sized carrots. Put those in there, and then the peppers. Okay, so, and then at the end, when I'm processing, I'll do a taste test, and maybe I'll add some more kosher salt, or some garlic, a clove or 2 of garlic. And I'm sure there are other things, I've seen a lot of recipes on hot peppers. I want to make sure that I don't poison anybody. So the vinegar, the garlic, the salt, those are all preservative. If you start adding fresh fruit, fresh carrots, or fresh tomato, or something like that, it won't have the chance to brine, to lactoferment, and so you're almost going to have to, for a long shelf life, you're going to have to then at that point boil it on the stove, or keep it always in the refrigerator and have a shorter shelf life. On my lactoferments, I still do keep them in the refrigerator. But it's only so that, a year, 2 years later, I've got some barbecue sauce. I think it's been 3, going on 4 years. It's been in the refrigerator the whole time, and I'm quite comfortable using that. But you don't know what people are going to do. You can tell people when you give it to them, keep this in the refrigerator. If they leave it sitting out, it's going to start fermenting again. The lactofermentation is going to start up again. Or if you've added fresh ingredients, it's going to go bad. So, and then for bottling, you saw how the flip top bottles that I used this year and previous years. I bought the little 5-ounce squirt bottles. You have to thin it out quite a bit more to get it to use the squirt bottles, or you got to beat the hell out of them. And I just find that if people like the hot sauce, 5 ounces is not going to last them very long. So I'm kind of not doing the 5-ounce bottles anymore. I think what you have is an 8-ounce bottle, and I did some 16-ounce. With the same style, and those people use those for beer and other homemade carbonated beverages and whatnot too. So, if you need a link, I can send that to your dad as well on where to order those, but they're on Amazon. So processing is really just about getting it to the thickness you want. Make sure you do want to add some vinegar in there to extend that shelf life, give it that vinegary flavor, or less, more or less, depending on what your taste buds are. A little bit of rock salt, maybe some garlic, extra garlic. The stuff down the bottom of your processing jar, if you just keep ladling it off the top, you'll probably find there's a little more garlic flavor when you get down to where the actual garlic bulbs are. But there is garlic infusion throughout because of the way the process works. But I'm sure it's more intense in the stuff that's down towards the bottom. But I do try to mix it around and get the fruit mixed around, and etc. So you could easily do that. You can just ladle everything out, strain everything, and then remix all your solid ingredients. Mix those up real good using your food handling gloves, and then start ladling it in and processing it from a mixed standpoint. So I'm sure it's a better standards and practice for for more consistent flavor. So anyway, that's the process. The secret is to brine it. 3% salt solution, kosher salt, not table salt. It's the formula I use for that. You can be precise and get it exact, but the YouTube gurus tell me 3 tablespoons, 2.5 to 3.5 tablespoons. So I just use 3 tablespoons into a quart jar, and then pour in a quart of distilled water or spring water, some kind of filtered water, non-chlorinated. Shake it up, stir it up until it's clear. And then once the salt is fully suspended in the solution, start pouring that into your gallon jar that's being packed tight with your chopped up, diced up peppers, carrots, the garlics I just throw in whole cloves, squared pineapple and mango chopped up. I don't put those in the food blender, but you do want to put your peppers in a food processor. Get them to that small size for this recipe I'm telling you. You can brine whole peppers or half peppers or whatever. You can brine them that way. You don't get as much into a jar, and therefore you don't get as much hot sauce at the end. So I just prefer to dice them up. So 1 gallon diced up peppers would make 1.5 gallons or 2 gallons of hot sauce, as I've described. And that's the recipe. So you can have your airlock system, gallon jar, whatever peppers you grow. Now again, going back to the pepper mix. This year I'm doing Anaheim. I'm buying peppers again this year. I'm not counting on what comes up, because I found out all our volunteers are going to be cayennes and Tabascos. So I'm going back. I'm buying the Anaheims, the Hot Bells, the Mexibel, whatever you want to call those, the Friscos, the Jalapenos, the Habaneros. I will have cayennes and Tabasco, various sweet peppers, the New Mexico Hatch green chilies, New Mexico Sandia, New Mex, a couple of sweet bell peppers, and then of course I'll have my Carolina Reapers and my ghost peppers. So hopefully there won't be any deer pressure this year. I'll be able to harvest a couple bushel baskets of peppers by the time we get to that last freeze, and I'm sure I'll pick and brine some as the peppers come in and start to ripen. So I'll probably start brining in July, August, but the big harvest always comes just before the first hard freeze. 2 years ago, that was first week of November. Last year, it wasn't even mid-October yet. But whenever that happens, that's when the big harvest happens. So there you go. Hope you got 35 minutes to watch this video, because I'm not very well organized.